What happens when a man with a 10-figure bank account decides his pregnant wife is no longer part of the picture? For Alina Hayes, it meant being thrown onto the cold, rain-slicked streets of New York City with nothing but the clothes on her back and the child growing inside her. Her husband, the ruthless tech mogul Lucas Thorne, thought he had erased her. He thought their ironclad prenup made him untouchable. But he made one critical mistake. He forgot about the house. He forgot about the one secret buried in the foundation of his empire. And by the next afternoon, the homeless pregnant woman he discarded was about to become the legal owner of his multi-million-dollar mansion. The scent of money in the Thorne household was a physical presence. It wasn't the crass smell of new bills, but a layered fragrance of aged leather from the Eames chairs, imported lilies that were replaced every 2 days, and the subtle, clean aroma of ozone from the state-of-the-art air purification system. The penthouse, a glass palace overlooking Central Park, was less a home and more a museum exhibit titled Success. Alina Hayes had once been its prized acquisition. She met Lucas Thorne at a charity gala. She was a junior architect at a boutique firm there with her boss. He was the keynote speaker, a titan of the tech industry who had built his empire, Omnicore, from a single algorithm into a global behemoth. He was magnetic with a smile that could disarm world leaders and eyes that promised a universe of possibilities. He'd pursued her relentlessly, showering her with a life she'd only seen in magazines. Within 6 months, they were married. The first year was a whirlwind of private jets, alpine ski resorts, and galas where she wore gowns that cost more than her car. But slowly the gilding on the cage began to chip. Lucas didn't like her working. "My wife doesn't need a job, darling," he'd say, framing it as a luxury. "Your job is to be my beautiful Alina." He isolated her from her old friends, calling them unambitious. He critiqued her opinions on everything from politics to art, slowly sanding down her identity, until she felt like another one of his beautiful silent possessions. The illusion finally cracked the day she told him she was pregnant. She'd planned it perfectly. A quiet dinner at home, his favorite scotch, waiting the tiny pair of knitted booties she'd bought that afternoon, tucked into a small, elegant box. She was nervous, but overwhelmingly happy. A child would change everything. It would turn this cold glass box into a home. It would give them a real, unbreakable bond. Lucas walked in, late, shrugging off his custom Tom Ford jacket and immediately checking the stock tickers on his phone. "Bad day?" she asked softly. "The board is full of spineless cowards," he grumbled, not looking at her. "They're risk-averse. You don't build an empire by being risk-averse." "Well," she said, her hands trembling slightly as she pushed the small box across the marble table, "I have some news that I hope will make it better. It's a new venture. For us." He glanced at the box, annoyed by the distraction. He opened it with an impatient flick of his wrist. He stared at the booties, his face unreadable. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. The warmth drained from Alina's smile. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "I'm pregnant, Lucas," she whispered, her heart pounding. "We're going to have a baby." He didn't smile. He didn't rush to her side. He slowly closed the box and pushed it back towards her, a look of profound betrayal hardening his features. "No," he said, the word a shard of ice. "No, you are pregnant." "What are you talking about? We are pregnant. This is our child." He stood up his chair, scraping harshly against the floor. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Alina? Did you think you could just spring this on me and lock me in for life? We have a prenup for a reason. A prenup, Lucas. This isn't a business merger. This is our family. Tears welled in her eyes. I thought you loved me. I thought you'd be happy. Happy? He laughed, a bitter, ugly sound that echoed in the cavernous room. You've just introduced an unacceptable liability into my portfolio. This was not part of the plan. My plan. He began to pace his movements, sharp and predatory. A child complicates things. It complicates my estate, my inheritance, my focus. I'm on the verge of the biggest acquisition of my career, and you bring me this domestic drama. The cruelty of his words struck her like a physical blow. A liability, a drama. This is our child. There is no our child, he snarled, turning to face her. His eyes, once her universe, were now black pits of contempt. There is only you and the mistake you've made. And I don't tolerate mistakes in my life. Not in my business, and certainly not in my home. The argument escalated into a storm of venomous accusations. He called her a gold digger, a schemer who had planned this all along to bypass the meticulously crafted prenuptial agreement. Every fear she'd harbored about his love being conditional was being laid bare in the cruelest way possible. The prenup is airtight, Alina, he spat, grabbing his phone. It states clearly that in the event of a dissolution, you walk away with what you came in with, which, if I recall, was a mountain of student debt and a wardrobe from the Gap. You can't be serious, she sobbed, clutching her stomach. You would leave your pregnant wife with nothing. You're not my wife anymore, he declared, his thumb flying across the screen of his phone. You're a loose end, and I am going to tie you up. Two of his personal security guards men, built like refrigerators, who were usually a comforting presence, appeared at the door to the dining room. Their faces were impassive, but their eyes avoided hers. Frank, Dennis, Ms. Hayes is leaving. Lucas commanded his voice, utterly devoid of emotion. Pack a single bag for her, just the essentials. Escort her from the building. She is not to be permitted entry again. Alina stared at him aghast. Lucas, please don't do this. Think about the baby. I am, he said coldly. I'm thinking about how it will never bear my name or inherit a single cent of my fortune. You can tell whatever story you want, but my lawyers will bury you. Now get out of my house. The guards, Frank and Dennis, moved with quiet efficiency. One went to the bedroom, while the other stood by the door, a silent, immovable wall. Alina was frozen in place, her mind unable to process the speed of her life's demolition. 10 minutes ago, she was a wife, a future mother, living a life of unimaginable luxury. Now she was being evicted like a squatter. The guard returned with her old canvas suitcase, the one she'd brought with her when she first moved in. He'd thrown in a few random items, a pair of jeans, a sweater, her toiletries. He hadn't packed any of the designer clothes, the jewelry, the life Lucas had given her. It was a symbolic and brutal erasure. You can't do this, she whispered, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. It's raining. Where will I go? Lucas walked over to her, and for a moment she thought he might show a flicker of remorse. Instead, he reached out and took the platinum wedding band from her finger. He held it up to the light, then dropped it into his pocket with a chilling finality. That's not your concern, he said. Your existence is no longer my concern. The guards gently but firmly guided her towards the private elevator. As the doors slid shut, the last thing she saw was Lucas Thorne turning his back on her, already pulling out his phone to continue his business, as if he had just swatted away a minor annoyance. The elevator descended 50 floors in silence. When the doors opened into the grand, marble-clad lobby, the doorman who had always greeted her with a warm smile now looked at the floor shame-faced. One of the guards pushed her suitcase onto the wet pavement of Fifth Avenue, and then without a word they were gone. The cold July rain plastered her thin silk blouse to her skin instantly. Taxis sped past their lights, blurring through her tears. The city noise was a deafening roar after the curated silence of the penthouse. She was pregnant. She was homeless. And the man she had promised to love for the rest of her life had just left her to drown in the storm. Alina stood shivering on the sidewalk, the city's indifference a crushing weight. Her phone. He hadn't taken her phone. With numb fingers, she pulled it from her pocket. The screen was slick with rain. She scrolled through her contacts, a list curated by Lucas. Business associates, wives of his partners, the concierge service. Then she saw the name, a relic from her past life. Chloe. Chloe Jensen was her college roommate, a fiercely loyal, no-bullshit journalist who worked for an online investigative news site. They hadn't spoken much since the wedding. Chloe had made her distrust of Lucas clear from the start. "He looks at you like he's buying art, not falling in love," she'd warned. Alina, blinded by the whirlwind romance, had been offended. Now those words echoed with prophetic clarity. She pressed the call button, praying Chloe hadn't changed her number. It rang once, twice. "Hayes, is that you?" Chloe's voice was sharp, laced with surprise. A sob escaped Alina's throat, raw and broken. "Chloe," she choked out. I need help." "Where are you? What's wrong?" The immediate shift in Chloe's tone from surprise to alarm was the first warmth Alina had felt in hours. "He kicked me out," Alina cried, huddling under the meager shelter of a building's awning. "Lucas, he found out I'm pregnant and he threw me out. I have nothing. I'm on the street." A string of curses erupted from Chloe's end. "That son of a bitch! I knew it! Okay, stay right where you are. Tell me the exact address. I'm coming to get you." 20 agonizing minutes later, a beat-up Toyota Corolla, a stark contrast to the black town cars that usually lined the street, screeched to a halt in front of her. Chloe leaped out a whirlwind of righteous fury in a worn leather jacket and wrapped Alina in a hug that was fierce and grounding. "We're going to my place," Chloe said, her arm protectively around Alina's shoulders as she bundled her into the passenger seat. "It's not a penthouse, but it's warm, and he's not there." Chloe's apartment in Queens was a world away from the sterile opulence Alina had grown accustomed to. It was small, cluttered with books and research papers, and smelled of coffee and ink. But it was real. It was a home. Chloe sat her down on a slightly lumpy sofa, wrapped her in a thick quilt, and pressed a steaming mug of tea into her hands. For the first time that night, Alina's trembling began to subside. She told Chloe everything, the dinner, the booties, the coldness into Lucas's eyes, the words liability and loose end. Chloe listened, her expression growing darker with every word. "Okay," she said, finally, her voice steely. "First you sleep. You've been through a trauma. Tomorrow we fight back. We're not letting that monster get away with this." "But how?" Alina whispered, looking at her bare finger. "He has the best lawyers in the country. The prenup." He said it's ironclad. Ironclad things have a tendency to rust when you shine a bright enough light on them. Chloe said, her journalist instincts flaring. "Tomorrow first thing we're calling a lawyer, not one of his slick corporate sharks. I know a guy, David Chen. He's a bulldog. He specializes in fighting Goliaths." Lying on Chloe's sofa bed, wrapped in a quilt that smelled like laundry detergent, and home. Alina felt a tiny, fragile seed of hope. It was a terrifying, uncertain future, but she wasn't alone anymore. The storm was still raging outside, but in this small, cluttered apartment, she had found a harbor. The next morning, the reality of her situation hit Alina with the force of a physical blow. The grey morning light filtering through Chloe's window revealed the stark truth: she owned nothing but a suitcase of old clothes and a phone. Her bank account was a joint one with Lucas, which he had likely already drained or frozen. She was pregnant, unemployed, and dependent on the kindness of a friend she had neglected. Chloe was already up a whirlwind of activity. "Coffee's on. I've already emailed David Chen. He's a friend of a friend, specializes in family law with a side of corporate takedowns. He agreed to see us this afternoon pro bono for the initial consultation." "Chloe, I can't pay him," Alina said, shame washing over her. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Right now, we need to know what we're up against." David Chen's office was not the sprawling, mahogany-paneled suite of Lucas's legal team. It was a modest but immaculate space in a less glamorous part of Midtown, lined with law books and case files. Mr. Chen himself was a man in his late 40s, with a calm demeanor, sharp, intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses, and an air of quiet intensity. He listened to Alina's story without interruption, his pen occasionally scratching a note on a legal pad. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Thorne's reputation precedes him," he said calmly. "He's known for being aggressive and meticulous. Do you have a copy of the prenuptial agreement?" Alina's heart sank. "Lucas kept the original. I might have a digital copy in my old cloud storage." With Chloe's help, Alina managed to log into an old email account and find the document she had signed in a daze of love and trust a year and a half ago. She forwarded it to Mr. Chen, who pulled it up on his large monitor. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the office was the soft clicking of his mouse as he scrolled through the dense legalese. Alina felt her hope shriveling with each passing second. Finally, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The look on his face was grim. "He wasn't exaggerating," David Chen said. "This is one of the most brutal, one-sided prenups I have ever seen. It was drafted by Sullivan and Cromwell Thorne's corporate firm. They've treated your marriage like a hostile takeover. It explicitly waives any and all claims to spousal support, property division, and any assets acquired during the marriage, regardless of circumstance. It even has a clause specifying that the conception of a child does not alter the terms of the agreement." The room felt cold. The iron wall was real. "So that's it," Alina whispered. "There's nothing I can do." "Challenging a prenup like this is an uphill battle," Mr. Chen admitted. "We could argue duress that you didn't have adequate independent counsel, but they've covered their bases. It documents that you were advised by a lawyer of your own choosing." Alina remembered the lawyer Lucas's team had recommended a man who had glossed over the details and rushed her through the signing. "So I'm entitled to nothing." She pressed her voice, trembling. "Not even for the child. We can and absolutely will sue for child support once the baby is born and paternity is established," David assured her. "The law is clear on that. A parent cannot waive their responsibility to their child. Lucas Thorne will pay for his child's upbringing. But in terms of your own settlement, this document," he gestured to the screen, "is designed to leave you with absolutely nothing." The finality in his voice was devastating. Alina felt the air leave her lungs. Lucas had won. He had thought of everything. He had built an impenetrable fortress around his fortune, and she was just another casualty left outside the walls. The elevator ride down from David Chen's office was a descent into a cold, silent hell. The hope that had buoyed Alina through the morning had evaporated, leaving behind the bitter residue of defeat. Chloe's hand was a warm, firm pressure on her back, the only thing keeping her upright. Out on the street, the city's relentless energy felt like an assault. Every laughing couple, every purposeful stride of a business person was a painful reminder of the life that had been stolen from her. The subway ride back to Queens was a blur of screeching wheels and flickering lights. Alina stared blankly at her own reflection in the dark window, seeing a pale, haunted stranger. The ironclad prenup wasn't just a document. It was a testament to the fact that Lucas's love had been a complete fabrication. He hadn't just protected himself, he had meticulously planned for her disposal from the very beginning. She remembered the lawyer his team had insisted she use for the prenup, signing a smooth, reassuring man named Mr. Jennings, who had met her in a lavish conference room, offered her sparkling water, and breezed through the 100-page document in under an hour. "Standard stuff, my dear," he had said, smiling paternally. "Just a formality to keep the business assets clean. Lucas adores you. This will never even matter." She had been a fool so blinded by love and gratitude that she'd walked willingly into the slaughterhouse. "He played me." Alina whispered the words, barely audible, over the rattle of the train. "From the very start, he played me." "He didn't play you, Alina. He conned you." Chloe corrected her voice, low and simmering with fury. "There's a difference. A play is part of a game. This was a calculated demolition, but we're not done. I don't care what that paper says. There's always a loose thread. We just have to find it and pull." Back in the haven of Chloe's apartment, the fragile sense of security did little to numb the pain. Alina sank onto the sofa, the quilt Chloe wrapped around her, feeling as heavy as a lead blanket. Despair was a physical ache in her chest, a cold dread that settled deep in her bones. What kind of future could she offer her child now? A life on the run, from the shadow of one of the most powerful men in the world, fighting for scraps of child support that he would undoubtedly use as a weapon against her for the next 18 years. Meanwhile, back in his quiet midtown office, David Chen couldn't let the case go. Long after his paralegal had gone home, he sat staring at the digital copy of the Thorne prenup, a half-empty cup of coffee growing cold beside him. It wasn't just the injustice that gnawed at him, it was the sheer breathtaking arrogance of it. The lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell hadn't just drafted a legal document, they had crafted a monument to their client's power. It was designed to be unassailable, a legal masterpiece of cruelty, and that offended him on a deeply professional level. They thought they were untouchable. He stood and began to pace the length of his office, the city lights twinkling beyond his window. Challenging the prenup head-on was a fool's errand. They had anticipated every conventional attack. Duress. They had the sign-off from her independent counsel. Unconscionability, difficult to prove when the lifestyle she'd enjoyed was so extravagant. "So don't attack the fortress," he murmured to himself, the words crystallizing his strategy. "Go around it. Examine the terrain it's built on." The assets. His mind kept returning to the assets. The prenup dictates how to divide things, but it presumes the ownership of those things is absolute. What if it wasn't? He sat back down, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He pulled up the appendix again, the gleaming list of Lucas Thorne's treasures, the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, the villa in Tuscany, the chalet in Aspen, the estate in Greenwich. He decided to start digging, pulling public records and title histories for each one. It was a long shot, a desperate hunt for a clerical error, a forgotten lien anything. The penthouse was owned by MT Capital Holdings, LLC. The villa by Omnicore Global Properties SA. The chalet by another anonymous shell corporation. All were clean, straightforward, and legally insulated 6 ways from Sunday. It was meticulous, exactly as he'd expected. He felt a familiar weariness begin to set in. Maybe there was no loose thread. Then he got to the last and most significant property, Thorn Manor. The jewel in Lucas's crown. The sprawling 20-acre estate that lent him the old-world legitimacy his new money fortune couldn't buy. David typed the address into the Connecticut property database and waited. The result that loaded onto his screen was different. There was no no shell corporation. The chain of title was simpler and far more interesting. The current owner was listed as Lucas Thorn. The previous owner in a deed of gift filed 12 years prior was Richard Thorn. David Chen leaned forward, his fatigue vanishing, replaced by a jolt of pure adrenaline. Richard Thorn, the father. The quiet, respected philanthropist from a bygone era of industry, a man who had publicly clashed with his son's vulture capitalism on more than one occasion. Richard had died 3 years ago, but his legacy of quiet dignity and integrity was the polar opposite of his son's. Why a deed of gift? Why not sell it to him? Why not put it in a trust? A direct gift was a personal act, and personal acts often came with personal conditions. Standard title searches often only showed the top-line information. The real story, if there was one, would be buried in the full covenant record. His heart was hammering now. This was the scent of something real. He navigated the arcane system of the Greenwich Land Records Office, inputting his firm's credentials and paying the substantial rush order fee to have a fully certified high-resolution scan of the original deed and all attached covenants and riders sent to him immediately. The minutes crawled by. He brewed another pot of coffee, his mind racing with possibilities. He was venturing deep into legal territory that was more about family dynamics and a father's intent than corporate law. An hour later, an email pinged in his inbox. The subject line read, Certified File Thorn Manor Greenwich CT. He opened the encrypted PDF. It was dozens of pages long, filled with metes and bounds, surveyor's marks and dense blocks of legalese. He scrolled methodically, his trained eyes filtering out the boilerplate. He passed the main deed, the title insurance records, the zoning declarations. And then near the very end of the document, he saw a section header that made him stop breathing. Addendum. B covenants and legacy conditions. It was a rider attached to the deed of gift, a set of conditions that traveled with the property itself, binding any future owner. It was written in the formal, almost baroque language of old-school estate law, clearly drafted by a master of the craft. David read through the technical jargon until he landed on paragraph 3. Subsection C. His eyes widened. He reread the paragraph slowly at first, then again with rising excitement. He pushed his chair back from his desk and let out a short, sharp laugh that echoed in the silent office. The fortress had a secret door. The lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell had focused all their genius on the prenup on the marriage contract and had never bothered to scrutinize the foundational document of their client's most prized asset. Lucas, in his arrogance, had likely never read the fine print on a gift from a father he disdained. "Richard, you magnificent old bastard," David whispered, a wide, triumphant grin spreading across his face. He grabbed his phone and dialed Chloe's number, his mind already leaping ahead to the next day's confrontation. The call couldn't wait until morning. The phone buzzed on the coffee table, startling both Alina and Chloe from their somber silence. Chloe snatched it up. "David. It's almost 11 p.m. Please tell me you have something." David's voice on the other end was electric, charged with an energy that felt like a defibrillator jolt to the room's despairing mood. "It's not a loophole," he said the words crisp and victorious. "It's a goddamn front door key, and we're about to use it. I need you and Alina in my office. First thing, 9 a.m. Sharp. And Chloe," he added, "tell her to wear something that makes her feel powerful. She's going to need it." Sleep was impossible that night. The cryptic message from David sparked a tiny, terrifying ember of hope in Alina's chest. She didn't dare fan it into a flame, terrified it would be extinguished again. What could he possibly have found? She arrived at the office the next morning, feeling like an imposter in her own skin. She had chosen a simple but elegant navy blue sheath dress, a relic from her former life that Chloe had insisted she wear. It felt like armor, but it was armor covering a person who felt fragile and breakable. The atmosphere in David Chen's office was transformed. The grim resignation of yesterday was gone, replaced by the thrumming excitement of an impending battle already won. David was standing, not sitting, and on his desk, laid out like a battle plan, was a thick stack of papers. "Good morning," he said, his smile so wide it seemed to light up the room. "Alina, yesterday we were on the defensive, reacting to a document Lucas created to control you. Today we go on the offensive, armed with a document his father created to protect you." He gestured for them to approach the desk, tapping the top page with his finger. "This is the full certified deed to Thorn Manor in Greenwich." He explained his late-night hunch, his deep dive into the property records, and the discovery of Richard Thorn's name. "It seems the late Mr. Thorn knew his son better than anyone," David continued. "He knew Lucas was brilliant and successful, but also that he lacked a moral compass. He worried about what Lucas would do with the Thorn name, the Thorn legacy, and it seems he worried about how Lucas would treat his family. So he embedded an insurance policy directly into the deed of the manor, a moral landmine just waiting for Lucas to take the wrong step." David turned his large monitor towards them, displaying the scanned page from the addendum. He pointed to the highlighted section. He called it the Thorn Legacy Clause. It's not part of your prenup. In fact, it's a superior legal instrument because it's a conditional covenant tied to the property title itself. It dictates who holds ownership. And Lucas just violated its primary condition. Alina leaned in her eyes, trying to parse the dense, archaic script. In the event that the legal spousal partner of the grantee, Lucas Thorn, shall be with child, and thus carrying a direct lineal heir to the Thorn family legacy. And should the aforementioned grantee unjustly and summarily cast out said spousal partner from the marital home without due and legal cause or provision of support, then the full and unencumbered title to the demised premises, known as Thorn Manor, and all chattels, fixtures, and appurtenances therein, shall immediately, automatically, and irrevocably pass to said spousal partner to be held in trust for the benefit of the aforementioned heir. Her head spun. "I don't understand. What does it all mean?" Chloe, however, was starting to get it. A slow, incredulous smile was spreading across her face. "No way," she breathed. "No freaking way." David beamed. "It means, Alina, that Richard Thorn created an ejector seat, a failsafe to protect his grandchild and the woman carrying them from the very callousness his son just displayed. The clause creates a trigger, a pregnant spouse unjustly cast out. The moment Lucas threw you out onto Fifth Avenue, he didn't just make you homeless. He fulfilled the conditions of the clause. He forfeited his right to the property. He gave you his mansion. The words hung in the air, immense and unbelievable. Chloe let out a sound that was a cross between a laugh and a sob, grabbing Alina's arm. The old man did it. He reached out from beyond the grave and gave his monster son the ultimate punishment. Alina stared at David, then at the document, then back at David. The room tilted. Tears she hadn't realized were forming began to stream down her cheeks. But these were not the hot tears of grief or the cold tears of fear. They were tears of overwhelming, staggering shock, of a justice so poetic and so absolute it felt like a dream. So the house, the manor, with everything in it, it's mine, she finally managed to choke out. Legally, indisputably 100% yours. David confirmed, his voice ringing with satisfaction. The transfer of title was automatic at the moment of the transgression. All we have to do now is the paperwork. We file a declaration of transfer citing the clause. It's a formality. The act is already done. Lucas Thorne is currently living in a house that belongs to you. And the best part, he has no idea. David Chen slid a single crisp sheet of paper across the polished surface of his desk. It sat in the space between them, a stark white rectangle against the dark wood. It was a formal legal declaration, meticulously drafted citing the Thorne Legacy Clause and asserting her right of ownership under its terms. At the bottom of the page above, a neatly typed Alina Hayes, was a single empty line. Alina looked from the document to the simple black pen beside it, an object of immense weight. To sign this was not just to accept a gift. It was to light the fuse on a bomb. Lucas was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a leviathan of industry, a figure of immense power and infinite vengeance. To take his home, the very symbol of his ascendancy and status, was not just an insult. It was a profound personal attack. He would come after her with everything he had. The full force of his fortune, his army of lawyers, his influence that stretched into every corner of the city. He would try to crush her. Her hand trembled. For a split second, the ingrained fear of him, of his anger, his disapproval, his cold dismissal surfaced. She could walk away. She could sue for child support, live a quiet life, and never poke the dragon again. Then she looked at Chloe, whose eyes were shining with fierce pride, a silent message of "You've got this." She looked at David, whose calm, professional confidence was a bulwark. And then she instinctively placed her hand over her abdomen, over the tiny, nascent life that was the cause of all this chaos and her sole reason for fighting. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about a mansion or money. This was about survival. This was about sanctuary. Lucas had called her child a liability. He had tried to erase them both. Richard Thorne, a man she had never met, had left her a shield. To refuse to pick it up would be the ultimate act of cowardice. It would be letting Lucas win. A new kind of resolve, as hard and clear as diamond, solidified in her soul. The trembling stopped. The fear receded, replaced by a cold, protective fury. She was no longer Alina Hayes, the discarded wife. She was a mother. She was a guardian. And she would not be moved. She reached for the pen. The plastic was cool and smooth beneath her fingers. She uncapped it with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. Leaning forward, She pressed the nib to the paper. Her hand was perfectly unnaturally steady. With a firm, deliberate stroke, she signed her name. Alina Hayes. The signature was bolder, more confident than she had ever written it before. It was the signature of a woman claiming her power. She placed the cap back on the pen and pushed the signed document back towards David. "It's done," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. It was the voice of a queen, not a victim. "What's our next move?" David Chen picked up the paper, examining the signature with a satisfied nod. He carefully placed it with the other documents, assembling his arsenal. A predatory glint sparked in his eyes. "Next," he said, the word charged with anticipation. "We go to Greenwich. It's time to inform Mr. Thorne that there's a new lady of the manor." The drive to Greenwich was surreal. Alina sat in the back of David Chen's comfortable sedan, with Chloe beside her, watching the gritty landscape of New York City melt away into the lush, manicured greenery of Connecticut's Gold Coast. They passed through stone gates and down winding roads flanked by ancient trees, catching glimpses of stately homes that looked more like European castles than private residences. Finally, they turned onto a long, private driveway, marked by a simple, elegant sign, Thorne Manor. The driveway curved through a small forest before opening up to a breathtaking sight. The manor was a magnificent Georgian-style mansion of red brick and white stone, sprawling across a perfectly landscaped lawn that rolled down to the shimmering waters of the Long Island Sound. It was imposing, beautiful, and the heart of Lucas's world. David pulled the car to a stop in the circular driveway in front of the massive, glossy black door. "Ready?" he asked. Alina took a deep breath. "Ready." They walked up the stone steps. Before David could press the bell, the door was opened by a man in his late 60s, ramrod straight in a classic butler's uniform. He had a stern face, but intelligent, observant eyes. "Good afternoon," the butler said, his voice a polite, impenetrable barrier. "Mr. Thorne is not in residence. May I take a message?" "We are not here to see Mr. Thorne," David Chen said pleasantly, stepping forward. "My name is David Chen. I am an attorney representing Miss Alina Hayes." He gestured to Alina. "This is a legal matter. May we come in?" The butler's eyes flickered to Alina for a fraction of a second. There was no recognition, only professional dismissal. "I'm afraid that's not possible without an appointment." "I don't think you understand," David said, his tone hardening slightly. He produced the legal documents, the certified deed, the signed declaration. As of 9:15 this morning, when these documents were officially filed with the state of Connecticut, this property, Thorne Manor, and all its contents legally belong to my client, Miss Hayes. You are in fact standing in her home. Now I suggest you let us in." The butler, whose name was Arthur, had served the Thorne family for 40 years. He had served Richard Thorne, and he had watched Lucas grow from a boy into the ruthless man he was today. He read the butler's face, a flicker of shock quickly masked by professional composure. He took the documents, and his eyes scanned the key phrases. Thorne Legacy Clause. Irrevocable transfer of title. Alina Hayes. His gaze lifted from the paper and settled on Alina. This time, he truly saw her. He saw the quiet strength in her eyes, the protective hand resting on her stomach. He remembered old Richard Thorne, a man he had deeply respected, ranting about his son's lack of honor. He remembered the old man creating this very clause, with his lawyers calling it an insurance policy for my soul. Arthur's lifetime of training warred with his long-dormant loyalty to the man who had written this document. The choice was clear. He straightened his back, handed the papers back to David, and stepped aside, opening the door wide. "My apologies, madame," he said, his voice now directed at Alina with a new, profound respect. "Welcome home." They stepped into a grand foyer with a soaring ceiling, a sweeping staircase, and black and white marble floors. It was stunning, but as cold and impersonal as the penthouse had been. The rest of the household staff, a housekeeper and a chef, appeared drawn by the unusual scene at the door. Arthur addressed them with quiet authority. "This is Ms. Alina Hayes," he announced. "Due to certain legal arrangements made by the late Mr. Richard Thorne, she is the new owner of this house. We will now be taking our orders from her. Please continue with your duties until she instructs you otherwise." The staff stared bewildered, but Arthur's word was law within the house. They nodded and dispersed, whispering amongst themselves. "Now," David said, turning to Alina, "we wait." They didn't have to wait long. An hour later, the roar of a sports car engine filled the driveway. Lucas Thorne, clad in a casual but ridiculously expensive cashmere sweater, strode in laughing as he spoke into his phone. "The deal is done. They folded. I told you they would." He stopped dead. He saw Alina standing by the grand fireplace. He saw Chloe looking defiant. He saw a lawyer he didn't recognize. His smile vanished, replaced by a thunderous scowl. "What the hell is this?" he roared, ending his call. "Alina, I told you to get out of my life. And who the hell let you into my house? Arthur." Arthur appeared from the study. "Sir, what is she doing here? I want her and her trashy friend and this ambulance chaser out of my house. Now, call security." "I would advise against that," David Chen said calmly, "as the security team is now employed by Ms. Hayes." Lucas stared at him, bewildered. "What did you say?" "Perhaps you should have paid more attention to the terms of your father's gift, Lucas," Alina said, her voice shaking slightly, but holding firm. She had rehearsed this moment in her head a dozen times on the car ride over. "He didn't trust you. It seems he was right not to." David stepped forward and handed Lucas a copy of the deed and the filed declaration. "It's called the Thorne Legacy Clause, a special provision your father put in place. By throwing your pregnant wife out onto the street, you triggered it. This house, the cars in the garage, the art on the walls, every stick of furniture, it all belongs to Alina now." Lucas snatched the papers, his face turning as he read. He scanned the lines, his eyes wide with disbelief, which quickly morphed into pure, unadulterated rage. "This is impossible! It's a trick!" he bellowed, crumpling the papers in his fist. "My lawyers will tear this apart. I'll have you all arrested for trespassing." "They won't, and you can't," David said coolly. "It's perfectly legal and ironclad. Your father's attorneys did an excellent job. You committed the one act that forfeited your ownership. You can, of course, have your legal team review the documents. In the meantime, I suggest you pack a bag. Just the essentials." He used Lucas's own words, a deliberate, sharp twist of the knife. The irony was not lost on Lucas. His face contorted in a mask of fury. He took a step towards Alina, his hand raised. "You bitch," he seethed. "You think you can take this from me?" Before he could take another step, Arthur the butler moved with surprising speed, positioning himself between Lucas and Alina. "That is enough, sir," he said, his voice firm. "This is her house now. I will not permit you to harm her." Lucas looked from Alina's defiant face to Chloe's smug grin. to his lawyer's calm certainty, and finally to his own butler's betrayal. He was cornered, beaten. The realization crashed down on him. He, Lucas Thorne, the master of the universe, had been outmaneuvered by a dead man, a woman he'd discarded, and a clause he'd never bothered to read. He let out a strangled roar of frustration, turned on his heel, and stormed up the grand staircase. Minutes later, he came back down carrying a single leather duffel bag. He didn't look at any of them. He walked to the front door, wrenched it open, and paused on the threshold. He turned, and his eyes locked on Alina. The look in them was no longer just contempt. It was pure hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I will destroy you." Then he was gone, the slam of the heavy door echoing his defeat through the vast, silent mansion. The silence that followed Lucas's departure was profound. Alina felt a wave of dizziness leaning against the mantelpiece for support. Chloe rushed to her side. "You did it," Chloe breathed, half laughing, half crying. "You actually did it." The victory, however, was short-lived. An hour later, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, another vehicle, a black Mercedes sedan with tinted windows, swept up the driveway. "Brace yourself," Arthur said, his face grim. "That will be Mrs. Isabella Thorne." Isabella Thorne. Lucas's mother was the iron fist inside the family's velvet glove. She was a formidable woman in her 60s, impeccably dressed with a face that looked like it had been carved from ice and a stare that could curdle milk. She had always treated Alina with thinly veiled disdain, seeing her as an unworthy addition to the Thorne dynasty. She didn't wait to be let in. She used her own key and swept into the foyer, her eyes immediately finding Alina. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice low and venomous. "My son called me hysterical. He's been thrown out of his own home by this schemer." Her eyes raked over Alina, dismissing her. "Hello, Isabella," Alina said, finding a reserve of strength she didn't know she possessed. "I'm afraid what Lucas told you is true. This is my home now." "Don't be absurd," Isabella scoffed. "You are a temporary amusement who got herself knocked up. You signed a paper. You get nothing. Now get out before I have you removed for trespassing." "Your husband Richard felt differently," David Chen interjected smoothly, stepping forward. He explained the legacy clause again, his tone patient but firm. Isabella listened, her expression unreadable, but a muscle twitched in her jaw. Unlike her son, she was not ignorant of her late husband's ways. She knew of his disapproval, his sentimental honorable streak, that she had always despised as a weakness. When David finished, she didn't argue the legality. She changed tactics. She advanced on Alina, her eyes glittering with malice. "You may have found a clever little loophole, you pathetic girl," she hissed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But you have no idea what you've done. You have made an enemy of my son, and you have made an enemy of me. We will crush you. We will drag your name through the mud until no one in this city will even look at you. We will bleed you dry with legal fees. You will regret the day you ever met a Thorne." She was standing so close, Alina could smell her expensive, suffocating perfume. It was a raw display of intimidation meant to make her crumble. But Alina didn't crumble. She thought of her baby. She thought of the cold rain on Fifth Avenue. She met Isabella's icy stare without flinching. "Your son already tried to destroy me, Isabella," Alina said, her voice even and clear. "He failed. Your threats don't scare me. This house, this legacy, it doesn't belong to you or to Lucas anymore. It belongs to Richard Thorne's grandchild. and I will protect it and my child from both of you. Now, she said, gesturing to the door, I believe you know the way out. For a heart-stopping second, the two women were locked in a silent battle of wills. Then a flicker of something surprise, grudging respect passed through Isabella's eyes. She gave a short, sharp, humorless laugh. You have more spine than I thought. She conceded, her tone dripping with acid. It won't be enough. She turned and walked out as imperious in defeat as she had been in her attack. The war was far from over. It had just begun. But as the door closed behind Isabella Thorne, Alina stood tall in the grand foyer of her new home, no longer a victim, but a queen defending her castle. Alina's story didn't end with her taking the mansion. It was the beginning of a new, more challenging chapter. The house wasn't just a shelter. It was a fortress from which she had to fight a protracted legal and public relations war waged by Lucas and Isabella Thorne. But they underestimated her. With the resources of the estate, the wise counsel of David Chen, the unwavering loyalty of Chloe, and the quiet, steadfast support of Arthur, she fought back. She used her architectural background to begin lovingly restoring the manor to the dignified vision Richard Thorne once had, turning the cold showpiece into a warm, living home. When her son, whom she named Richard in honor of the grandfather who had saved them, was born, the battle took on a new meaning. It was no longer about winning against Lucas, but about building a better legacy. Alina's journey from a heartbroken homeless woman to a powerful, resilient mother is a stark reminder that sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. It's a story of how a patriarch's foresight, a woman's courage, and the unbreakable bond of motherhood can triumph over the most ruthless forms of greed and cruelty. Thank you for listening to this incredible story of resilience and poetic justice. If you were moved by Alina's journey, please show your support by hitting the like button below. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that strength can be found in the darkest of times. And for more true life dramas and inspiring stories, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell. What did you think of the Thorne Legacy Clause? Let us know in the comments below. We'll see you in the next story.